In the Ancestor's New House by Marissa Lingen. The Ancestor was in a bad mood again, and he was making Ingwil pay for it. "This house is utterly unacceptable," he said for the 20th time. "Tiny, shabby, one room, hardly any furniture, no decorations to speak of. We need another building. We need more. My status deserves it." "I couldn't carry you from one building to another anyway, just me," said Ingwil, her patience gone. She knew she needed to brush flies from the Ancestor. She carried on preparing their suppers instead. "And you get angry when I drag you." The Ancestor was silent. Since the Ancestor only spoke in Ingwil's mind, this was much the same from an outside perspective, but to Ingwil, cooking potatoes, it was far more peaceful. The peace did not last long. It never did. Nor did the complaints vary on such a day when the thunder lingered in the distance and the Ancestor's bones ached under his wrappings. "I should be carried by a proper tribe of bearers, bred to a smooth gait," said the Ancestor. "I should have more women to tend me, not just you. I should dwell in my halls. Your headband is nasty," said the Ancestor. "You have forgotten to put the mask on when you chase the flies from me. Every single time you forget." "The mask is gone," said Ingwil. "It attracted too much attention. A woman with such a large bundle was bad enough." She had balled the headband that marked her nobility up in her pack when she and the Ancestor had fled. Her face was pinched and pocked from when everyone else had died and she had lived. But the hairy-faced invaders wanted princesses, even ugly princesses. Safer to have no status, to toil away anonymously with a bundle. The Ancestor was silent again. The potatoes were done. Ingwil lit the Ancestor's portion for him and ate her own, quickly, quietly. They had a routine, the two of them. She had left behind the bodies of the Ancestor's other descendants, other servants, and with them the grander rhythms of his court. Ingwil did not even know who called himself the Inca now, nor whether any power remained to him. No one came to consult the Ancestor now about the matters of state. There was no order wherein the Inca could proceed from Ancestor to Ancestor, hearing advice and deciding the best course of action. All was chaos. But Ingwil and the Ancestor had found themselves a place in the high mountains, away from the poxes and the chaos, where they could have a small garden, and Ingwil could shoo the flies when she was not tending to the house and garden. The Ancestor grew restive. Ingwil rested. Ingwil breathed. Ingwil avoided the eyes of the hairy-faced men. And the Ancestor knew what had befallen some of his descendants. Topa Inca's body had been burned, so that he could only observe his lands from a jar instead of a resplendent body. If no one remained to make the Ancestor his ritual garments but Ingwil, no one to cook for him but Ingwil, well, no one burned him, no one scattered his remains on the mountainsides either. They were safe, for now. The Ancestor kept saying, "for now." Ingwil thought, forever, if we are lucky, if we maintain our new machadero and placate the spirits correctly, if we do this more successfully than those who came before. That evening, when she went out to draw water from the stream, there was someone else on the mountainside. The other person was trying, not at all successfully, to hide behind some rocks and be quiet. Ingwil thought of hiding also, of going back to the house and hiding, but she decided that someone who wanted to hide from her, who did it that badly, was probably no threat. "Come out," she said. "You might as well come out now. I know you're there. Come out." The other person was a woman who followed the hairy-faced men. Ingwil jumped back, and the woman startled back also. Ingwil made a placatory gesture. "What are you doing this far into the mountains, away from your menfolk?" Ingwil mused aloud. "My man died, and I did not want to be passed from soldier to soldier," the woman answered, barely above a whisper. It took a great deal of control for Ingwill not to jump again. She had not expected an answer, had expected the woman to speak like an outlander. "Where did you learn to speak the people's language?" asked Ingwill. "What?" said the woman. "Oh, the language of the valley? I pick up languages easily. I have to survive." Ingwill sighed. She drew her water at the stream as she had planned. "Come to my house, then. I cannot turn you out to sleep on the mountain, and there is no one else. What is your name?" "Lucena." "Lucena. I am Ingwill. I live with my ancestor here. You may stay with us a night or two." Lucena bobbed her head. "Thank you." Ingwill acknowledged the courtesy curtly. Perhaps Lucena could do some more of the menial chores for the ancestor. She seemed to gain a little confidence with each moment that Ingwill did not attack her. Ingwill looked Lucena over carefully. Her skin was very close to Lucena's own in color, darker than most of the hairy-faced men. Perhaps the women were more like regular people, and she covered her hair not with a headband, but with a larger cloth. She was taller than Ingwill, almost as broad in the shoulders, clearly not as strong. Her clothing was strangely fastened, with many complicated lacings and pieces that had once been white and were now dingy. Lucena looked at the sky. The last pink fragments of sunset had slipped behind the next mountain. "I must, before we go to your house, may I speak to the Supreme One?" Ingwill blinked at her. "How could I stop you?" Lucena's jaw worked visibly, but she shook her head and then bowed away from the direction the sun had set, murmuring words that Ingwill could not have heard even if she had been able to understand them. When Lucena had finished and scrambled back to her feet, Ingwill took her back to the house, thoughtfully. There had been no mochadero to maintain there by the stream, but the strange woman was clearly diligent in maintaining connections to the spirit world. Perhaps she and the ancestor would get along well from a certain reverent distance, taking some of the ancestor's relentless attention from Ingwill. They reached the house in silence. "Take your shoes off," said Ingwill at the door. Lucena hesitated. "The floor is clean, and you must show respect." Lucena's face smoothed, seeing that Ingwill was taking her own shoes off as well. No one, even in their current reduced state, would wear shoes in the presence of an ancestor. It was unthinkable. But as Lucena's eyes accustomed to the shade of the house, they had a new problem. "That—" Lucena took a step back, bumping the wall. "What is that?" "She is rude," said the ancestor. "She is foreign," Ingwill answered the ancestor, and then turned to Lucena's question. "That is the ancestor. Atok, mighty of his name. I care for him. There were many of us once in his cohort. Now there is just me. I cannot—" Lucena's throat worked. "I cannot touch that." The ancestor's reply was loud in Ingwill's ears. "Indeed she cannot!" "No, he will not let you," Ingwill agreed, and Lucena relaxed. "I will help you with the cooking? The cleaning?" Lucena said tentatively. "If I stay?" "The cooking, the cleaning, if you know how," said Ingwill, "but not the care of the ancestor. That is for me alone." "Thank the Supreme One," said Lucena fervently. "Rude," repeated the ancestor, "and untaught. Where did you find this beast woman? Why does she look so strange? The cloth on her head is not a headband, so she is not noble, no cousin of yours. It is cloth on her head, for no purpose." "She was by the stream. She needed shelter for the night. She will help me," said Ingwill. Lucena was staring at her, but Lucena was not her main problem. "I do not know her," said the ancestor. "I do not know her people. No one I know in the other world knows her." This was a problem. The ancestor and Ingwill had their roles very clearly divided. The ancestor knew things. Ingwill did things. The ancestor could not do things. If Ingwill was going to have to both know things and do things, she thought, her life was already full as it was. She talked to the other world, she said, before we came in. She talked to Inti, she said. I am right here, said Lucena. And she is right here, Ingwil agreed. No one else is right here to help me. Only her. That is so, the ancestor admitted. She may help you, but she knows not to touch me. She will not touch you, said Ingwil. She returned to Lucena. You already know not to touch him. Come, I will get you some food. Ingwil let Lucena sleep between her and the wall, keeping the ancestor safe from her motions in the night. The other woman's sleep was fitful, and she muttered strange words. In the darkest hour of the night, the ancestor also muttered something strange, something Ingwil did not hear or understand, and there was quiet in the house. Finally, Ingwil could sleep. Lucena learned quickly how to tend to the garden, how to clean the house, though it was clear that nothing was familiar. Nothing was the way she had done it in her own country. She was very quickly too useful to send away. She would not eat most of the kinds of meat, only fish, and she stopped to talk to the spirits too often, and when Ingwil tended to the ancestor, she sighed loudly. These were small things to trade for another set of hands around the house and the garden. Ingwil did not want to pry, but the ancestor had no such compunctions. Ask her why she has come away from her own people, the ancestor commanded, and whisk these flies away from me. It grows hot. Ingwil sighed and padded over to wield the whisk. Why have you left your own people? She parroted, well used to the ancestor only speaking to his own kin. The flies buzzed up around her own head. She was not there to tend to her own person. The flies were allowed to alight on her, to creep through her hair, to crawl on her headband. The soldier who brought me died, said Lucena, pounding diligently at the corn Ingwil had set her to grind. I did not care to be passed from one hand to another, so I left while they were determining whose I should be. If I had been one of their own women, perhaps they would not treat me so. But we live in the world that is, not the world we wish for. Ingwil peered at her, anticipating the ancestor's next question. Aren't you one of their own women, then? Oh, no. My people come from further east, further toward the rising sun. I was taken slave, like yours, but the other direction. Not like ours, said the ancestor, but Ingwil had gotten interested despite herself. Will they come for you? Lucena hesitated. Ingwil saw what it was the ancestor's job to see that Lucena did not know. She wanted to say no, so that Ingwil would keep her and feed her, but she did not know. Ingwil turned her head away and did not force an answer. Instead, Lucena turned to the ancestor, to the work Ingwil was doing with the midday flies. She looked at his withered body, at the almost hidden casket clutched to his chest. Only the essentials, only the things that Ingwil had managed to drag away when the prince had been captured and the other royal mummies with him, when the plague had taken the rest of the kin group. Only that which kept him together as himself and gave her meaning. None of the pomp, none of the glory, only that. What is in the casket? Asked Lucena. The ancestors... Ingwil hesitated. Lucena spoke the language of the people quite well, but it would be hard to explain the piece of what the ancestor had been in a way that would not sound grossly physical to her. His fingernails, his hair, the pieces of his limbs, his teeth, these were sublime, as he had been sublime. They had been carefully preserved. But Ingwil had seen her. She shied away from the ancestor, not in reverence, as he himself assumed, but in disgust. Possibly she had never encountered one so high before, and assumed that his body was as other bodies. It is his reliquary, she said finally. Do you know this word? Reliquary? No. It contains essence, said Ingwil. Lucena did not press her further. They learned to move around each other in this way, not pressing, not asking, not discussing the ways in which the ancestor existed with them, the ways in which Ingwil tended to him, the ways in which Lucena shied from him. They began to have a routine. They began to be comfortable together. Both watched the mountainside. At any time the hairy men might come, Ingwil had always watched. But now there was the complication of a recognizable woman as well as the ancestor to be hidden, and she did not entirely know what she would do with either. "My people," said Lucena sleepily one night, "my people used to have ancestors also, but we did not live with them. We died with them." Ingwil nodded. "We live with them until we die." "We built them special houses." "Yes, these we have." "Why is the ancestor not in his special house? Did the men who brought me take him away from it?" "Yes." "Ah," said Lucena. "Now I understand." Ingwil was not sure that she did, but they slept more peacefully that night. Ingwil had begun to think that perhaps she would weave Lucena clothing, that perhaps Lucena would be less conspicuous if she had the clothing of a normal person. Not that anyone who saw her nearby would mistake her for a normal person, but if Ingwil could send her up the mountain, into a field perhaps, it might work. She had nothing to weave. But with Lucena's work added to her own, the garden flourished. "Do you want me to thin the peppers?" Lucena asked one day. "It's not what I want, it's what the ancestor thinks is best," Ingwil rebuked her. Lucena frowned. "You were allowed to want things." "I serve the ancestor." "You eat the peppers." This was such a nonsensical thing to say that Ingwil could not think of an answer. She was not happy, however, to be saved from answering by noise echoing along the stream bed. It was a faint noise, hardly more than a frog splashing back into the stream and away, but Lucena froze like a beaten servant hearing her master's footsteps. "It's them," she whispered. "I fear so," said Ingwil. They hurried into the house. As they had both known from the start, there was nowhere to hide Lucena. The pile of potatoes was too meager to cover even the ancestor, much less himself and a living, breathing, full-grown woman. "You must hide on the ancestor's platform with him," said Ingwil. "What?" said Lucena. "This is unacceptable," said the ancestor. "So is sending her off with them," snapped Ingwil. "I won't have time for the two of you to argue." "There is no two," said Lucena. "It is true," said the ancestor. "She is so far beneath me that there is only me." "That is a sound plan," said Ingwil. "She should get beneath you." "Don't make me do this!" cried Lucena. But her kind and docile benefactress was suddenly implacable. She lifted the mummy. "You know I hate to be dragged," said the ancestor. "We're not going anywhere," said Ingwil. "Lucena, lie down." "I will wash and wash," said Lucena through her teeth. "I should say she will," said the ancestor. "My platform is not for the likes of her." Ingwil deposited the ancestor in Lucena's arms and grated, "Take care of her. I know you can, and you will. For me, for yourself." Then she walked outside, folded her arms, and waited for the hairy-faced men to come. They did. Lucena embraced the ancestor like he was her child, his withered body pressed against her filthy foreign dress. Ingwil stood in the door like their sentinel. The foreign men saw her and said many things to her. She stood there until one of them propelled her aside. There was a man with a hairy face inside the house, and he was paying no attention to the huddling woman and the mummy on the platform. "What is happening?" Lucena whispered. The ancestor was silent, not only to Lucena's ears, but to Ingwil's as well. He was concentrating. The hairy-faced man said things that Lucena understood. She could have translated them for Ingwil if she had been able to move from the ancestor's embrace, if she had been able to show herself, but then all would be lost. The hairy-faced man was asking whether Ingwill lived alone, who helped her to farm, whether this hovel was all there was on the entire mountain, whether she had seen a woman of what passed for quality in these parts, a slave, run off when her master died before the others could properly determine who was to inherit her, a Marissa. Ingwill stared at him. She kept her face impassive. She knew that keeping still was the way, that she must walk the line of still being the noble woman she was, and yet not offending the loud stranger. He spread his arms wide in her house. He pointed at things. He raised his hand as if to hit her. He did not hit her. There was no reason to hit her, but there were potatoes in a bin. There were many lumpy, fine potatoes, and he made loud noises and started poking at the potatoes. "Those are mine. I grew them," said Ingwill. I will eat them. I will need them to eat." The hairy-faced man rested his hand on his weapon, and Ingwill went silent. The potatoes were a better loss than the Ancestor, or Lethe. He did not take them all. Ingwill was the one to do things, and the Ancestor was the one to know. But this time Ingwill knew. She knew in her heart that things had changed completely between Lethe and the Ancestor, though she would not be able to make the Ancestor say so. Once Lethe had consented to hold him in her arms, thinking that he was nothing, thinking that he was a withered lack, it had all changed. So she stood with no expression, and she waited, and the hairy-faced man left her home and took her fear with him. After he had gone back down the stream, down the hill, she took the Ancestor carefully from Lethe's arms, carefully so as not to spill open the reliquary, and let her rise to her feet. Lethe brushed her dress ineffectually. Ingwill set the Ancestor back on his platform. "Horrible creature," said the Ancestor. "What did he do?" Lethe whispered. "He went away," said Ingwill. "Not him," said Lethe, dismissing the hairy-faced man she had so feared with a single flick of her hand. "Him! The Ancestor!" "What did you do?" Ingwill asked him. "I have a very good relationship with Mama Kilya in my time between this world and the next, despite the fact that you seem to be permanently opposed to using any of her tears to enhance my current reduced circumstances," said the Ancestor with dignity. "I asked her to dazzle the eyes of the beast who searched for our new servant, so that he did not take her from us, and, incidentally, find me." "He used moonlight on the eyes of the hairy man," Ingwill reported. "You don't happen to have any silver? He won't stop asking about it. Or gold. Gold would be even better." Lethe sat down on the floor with a thump, and started to laugh, then to cry. "What is wrong with the servant?" asked the Ancestor. "She is relieved," reported Ingwill, who was not entirely sure herself. "You will both stay with me," said the Ancestor. "No," said Ingwill. The Ancestor was silent. It was not a happy silence. "I will stay with you mostly," said Ingwill. The Ancestor remained silent. "I will sometimes leave Lethe with you, and I will go to trade with others down the mountain. This will get us finer things for your dwelling, for our lives. And with Lethe here, we can have a second building." "A second building?" asked the Ancestor. "A proper second building," said Ingwill firmly, "for your compound. But I must be able to leave sometimes, to trade. I cannot only take care of you." The Ancestor thought this over. "He's real," said Lethe. "He really is. He's real." Ingwill shook her head. Lethe was very useful, and it would be a relief to have someone to leave with the Ancestor, someone else to work on a proper second building and tend to the garden. But sometimes it was a great trial to her that that person was a foreign person who said strange things. Still, her foreign ways did not get in the way of learning to build a proper wall. A few weeks later, Ingwil had shown her the right stones, just where she wanted it, and stood in the thin mountain sunlight, watching her put down the first stone, with the Ancestor waiting just inside the door of the house. "Tell her it will please Inti the sun god if she builds it further to the north," said the Ancestor. "She cares for the goodwill of Inti, this one." "Lucina knows how to praise the Supreme One herself, Ancestor," said Ingwil, glancing to Lucina out of the corner of her eye. "What does he say?" called Lucina. "I am not too proud to learn." She set down the brick, settled back on her haunches, and waited.